You're watching L&R Enigma, where every shadow hides a secret. Tonight, we delve into a story about an object most of us have in our homes, something we look into every single day without a second thought. But this story is about a mirror that didn't just reflect light, it reflected the past and what lived behind it. So, find a comfortable spot, dim the lights, and prepare to question every reflection you see from now on. Our story begins in 1998, in the quiet, rolling hills of rural Pennsylvania. The Caldwell family, Mark, Susan, and their 16-year-old daughter, Emma, had just moved into a sprawling, remote house. It was their dream home, an old Victorian with character, history, and a certain charm that modern houses just couldn't replicate. The previous owners, an elderly couple who had moved to a retirement community, left most of the heavy furniture behind, including a massive, ornate antique mirror in the master bedroom. It was a beautiful piece, with a dark, carved wooden frame depicting intertwining vines and flowers. But it wasn't perfect. A small, almost imperceptible crack spiderwebbed out from the bottom right corner, a tiny flaw in its otherwise pristine surface. The first few weeks were idyllic. The family settled in, unpacked their lives, and began to make the old house their own. The mirror was moved into Emma's room, as she had fallen in love with its Gothic elegance. It fit perfectly against the far wall, opposite her bed. At first, nothing strange happened. The house was quiet, peaceful even. The mirror simply did what mirrors do. It reflected the room, the sunlight streaming through the windows, and the smiling face of a teenager happy in her new home. But then, the quiet began to curdle. It started subtly. Emma started complaining that she felt like someone was watching her from the glass. She'd be doing her homework at her desk, and a flicker of movement in the reflection would catch her eye. When she'd turn to look, there was nothing, just her own reflection, staring back. She'd tell her parents, "It feels like there's someone standing right behind me," but only in the mirror. They reassured her it was just the stress of moving, the unfamiliarity of a new house, the play of light and shadow in an old building. They told her it was her imagination running wild. Every night, however, her unease grew. She started saying the same thing, her voice laced with more and more fear. "Mom, Dad, there are eyes behind me in the mirror. When I turn off the light, I can still see them." She described them as faint, glowing points of light, like embers in the dark, that would appear just over her shoulder in the reflection. She tried covering the mirror with a blanket before she went to sleep, but she'd wake up in the middle of the night to find the blanket on the floor. The mirror surfaced cold and exposed. Her parents, Mark and Susan, grew concerned but remained skeptical. They were practical people, not given to believing in ghost stories. They thought she was having nightmares, maybe even acting out for attention. They were a busy family, and it was easier to dismiss her fears as teenage drama than to confront the unsettling possibility that something was genuinely wrong. "Emma, it's just a dream," her father would say gently. "There's nothing there." But Emma knew what she was seeing was real. She felt it. The watching eyes were patient, malevolent, and they were getting clearer each night. Desperate to prove she wasn't losing her mind, Emma decided to gather evidence. She had an old camcorder, a relic from a family vacation a few years prior. One night, after her parents had gone to bed, she set it up on her dresser, aiming it directly at the mirror to capture both herself and her reflection. She pressed record, the small red light blinking silently in the dark. She lay in bed, her back to the mirror, pretending to be asleep, but with her eyes wide open, staring at the wall. The house was silent, save for the old clock ticking downstairs and the faint whisper of wind outside her window. Hours passed. The digital clock on her nightstand flipped past midnight, then 1, then 2. Emma was starting to drift off, her exhaustion finally winning out over her fear. Then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., the footage shows something that would change everything. Emma, visible in the reflection, is staring intently at the mirror, but in the real world, the camera shows her lying still in bed, facing away. Her reflection, this separate entity, remains motionless for a long, agonizing moment, and then it moves. Slowly, deliberately, the reflected Emma turns its head to look directly at the camera. even though the real Emma on the bed doesn't stir. The air in the room grew cold. A faint, almost inaudible cracking sound emanated from the mirror. Then, behind her reflection's shoulder, two glowing, predatory eyes materialized from the darkness within the glass. They weren't human eyes. They were cold, ancient, and filled with a hunger that seemed to suck the very warmth from the room. Emma, still lying in bed, suddenly bolts upright. A blood-curdling scream tears from her throat as she whips around to face the mirror. The camera catches the final, horrifying moments. The reflection in the mirror is smiling, a wide, unnatural grin splitting its face, while Emma's real face is a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. The camera falls from the dresser, tumbling to the floor, its lens capturing one last distorted image before the tape fills with a burst of static, followed by total, unnerving silence. The next morning, her parents found her on the floor, unconscious, a few feet from where the camera lay. Her face was pale, her body limp. They rushed her to the hospital, where doctors could find no physical reason for her state. She was in a catatonic stupor, unresponsive to any stimuli. But when Mark and Susan returned to the house, they made an even more chilling discovery. The antique mirror, the one that had been the source of their daughter's terror, was gone. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken glass on the floor, just an empty space on the wall where it had once hung. And the camcorder. It was still on the floor, its little red light still blinking. It was still recording. The police were called, and an investigation was launched. The case was bizarre from the start. A missing teenager found comatose and a missing antique mirror. The investigators took the camcorder and the tape as evidence, hoping it would shed some light on what had happened to Emma. They reviewed the tape, seeing exactly what Emma had recorded. The moving reflection, the glowing eyes, the horrifying smile. They were baffled, disturbed, but officially, they couldn't explain it. But then something even stranger began to happen. Every time an officer tried to play the tape, their own reflection, seen in any nearby glass or polished surface or window, a computer screen, even a glass of water would appear distorted. Some claimed their reflections would lag a second behind their movements. One seasoned officer, a man who had seen his share of strange things over a 20-year career, resigned just days after viewing the footage. He told his partner, in a hushed, trembling voice, that he had been looking at himself in his bathroom mirror at home when his own reflection blinked before he did. It was a slow, deliberate blink, an independent action that shattered his sense of reality. He couldn't unsee it. He couldn't live with the constant fear of looking at his own face. The story of the Caldwell mirror became a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered among the townsfolk of rural Pennsylvania. Emma eventually woke from her catatonia, but she had no memory of that night, or of the weeks leading up to it. The mirror was simply a blank in her mind. Her family, haunted by the events, sold the house and moved away, seeking to escape the shadow that had fallen over their lives. For years, the mirror was thought to be gone for good, vanished into whatever dark dimension it had come from. But then, about a decade later, it reappeared. It surfaced at a small, obscure, antique auction in another state. It was unmistakable, the same ornate wooden frame, the same small crack in the corner. It was listed in the auction catalog, with a very brief, very chilling description. It didn't mention its history, its craftsmanship, or its age. The description simply read, "The mirror sees you too." No one bid on it. The auctioneer tried to start the bidding, but the room remained silent. The collectors, the dealers, the curious onlookers, they all seemed to feel a palpable coldness radiating from the object. They could feel its gaze upon them. The mirror remained unsold, and after the auction, it vanished once again. The legend of the watching mirror serves as a stark reminder that some objects are not just inanimate things. They can be vessels, windows, to places we were never meant to see. They can hold echoes of the past, or perhaps be doorways for things that live in the spaces between reflections. So, the next time you glance at your reflection in a darkened window or a dusty old mirror, pay close attention. If you ever see a flicker of movement that isn't yours, if you ever feel a pair of eyes staring back at you from the dark, don't look too long. They might just be watching. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the unknown. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to be notified of our new mysteries every Sunday. Until next time, stay curious. L and our Enigma.